So here's my new crank that I got at a scrapper. So this is the third crank that I've actually got. This is ridiculous. Okay, the first crank that I got, it had one spun rod bearing over here. So I'll just show you this. So this crank is in excellent condition. The spun rod bearing, I actually tried to weld it, and this seemed to work okay until I measured the thing, and the welding had warped the crank so much that there was no way it was ever going to get straight again. So I actually tried to straighten it by putting in I put a toe jack between here, and I tried to jack these out. And I was able to straighten it a little bit, but I actually induced a crack right there in the corner. So this crank is toast. And the guy that sold it to me, I don't know whether he'd measured it, but the journal was this journal had a spun rod in it, and the spun bearing, creates some scratches and score marks usually, but it doesn't affect the size of the journal. But in this case, it had actually taken off 0.3 millimeters. Now, 0.3 millimeters is a massive amount, which means you've got to grind it like 0.5 or more. So, I don't want a crank that's been ground 0.5. So, and it wasn't straight because of the heat, and the bearing surface was actually so soft that it was as soft as ductile iron, essentially, because of the heating. It had actually ruined the temper. So this crankshaft was unusable, and it cost me $400, and the guy won't give me a refund. And he knew that this crankshaft was unusable, and he was just trying to get a few bucks on eBay. So you get screwed with these crankshafts, and you've got to be very, very careful. If you can't return it, don't buy it. This is the original crankshaft with the 3 spun bearings. Now these bearings all size right, and they could be just polished, but the problem is they actually got cracks in them. If you look very closely, it's too small to see on a camera, but the cracks mean that you wouldn't want to put this back in the engine. The cracks go this way. They're very small. They look like hairline scratches, but it actually cracks. So then I ordered a second crank, and the box came empty. Okay. Now this was a very reputable eBay, and he's perplexed what actually happened, but we've worked out that FedEx actually nicked the crank. So finally I have a good crank, and I went out there with my digital micrometer, and I measured it right there in his shop, and checked out that all the bearings are good. So these BMW cranks, I think, are quite remarkable because the surfaces are so hard that even at 120,000 miles, there's absolutely no wear on these bearings. I mean, I'm going to polish them, and this crank's can be good as new. Now, I did find that the crank was slightly bent, so I straightened it using the peening method. So here's the chisel that I use. So I ground this chisel so that a nice smooth round edge, and then I hit it as hard as I can into the middle journal, into the edge. And if you look very closely, you can see very slight marks. So it's too small to see on camera, but these cranks are so hard that I actually dented the chisel. So you can see how the chisel has been deformed there from hitting this thing. But I was able to get, it started off as 3.5 thou, that's in thousandths of an inch, and now I got it down to about 1.5 thou. The 1.5 thou is very good, and is, it's within the spec, because the BMW says that this can be out by as much as 0.15 millimeters. So this is much straighter than it needs to be put back in the engine. So that's all good. So there's a wear ring on most of these cranks over here, which is very troubling because when you put your seal back in, your seal is probably not going to seal. So I ground out that wearing using the following method. So this is a soft pad with a 400 grit sandpaper on it, and I put this on the angle grinder, and when this thing's rotating, well, I can just turn it on so you can see. But I've got this lathe on a slow rotate, and basically if you take your angle grinder, you can just get it in like this, without touching the chuck or this counter-rotating counterweight. And if I get it in there, I can actually put a bit of pressure on here and actually grind out the wearing. And that worked very well. And this is perfectly smooth to the touch. So that will seal. So that's excellent. So the next thing is going to be to polish this, and I'll update you when that happens.